Dr. Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General, says loneliness is an epidemic.
And almost like someone turned a switch in 2013, girls in America and many other countries suddenly become very anxious, depressed, and self-harming.
If New York's powerful Democrats hate your politics, well, a prison cell might well be in your future.
There were no riots. There hasn't even been a good-sized pro-Trump protest anywhere in years.
The system, as the materials that make this great country.
Pictures. Okay, get off your chat GPT and listen to us. So earlier in the week, Adam and I did a panel on happiness, and now we're doing a panel on all the world's problems and existential despair. And so after the panel, you'll have a choice. The Aspen Institute has kindly arranged buses if you want to. When you reach that level of total despair, you can go up a mountaintop and throw yourself off. Or you can go to a Michelin star restaurant in Aspen, Colorado. So what my goal here is to get us to talk about this complex vortex and to try to arrive at some level of greater clarity of like, what's the big picture here, what's actually going on, what's driving all this. Adam, I'll start with, well, actually I should introduce you folks. Sherrilyn Ifill, right to my left, is the Vernon Jordan Jr. Professor of Law at Howard University. Before that, she was head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and has been named one of the 100 most influential people in the world, America, the universe, some large group of people. She's in the top 100. Adam Gopnik is a staff writer at The New Yorker, has won 3 National Magazine Awards. And he's written some great books, Parish to the Moon, 1,000 Small Sanities, and his new book is called All That Happiness Is, about accomplishment. Kara Swisher is probably the most prominent tech journalist in America. She has her famous podcast, On with Kara Swisher, and she had a book come out maybe 6-8 months ago called Burn Book, Tech Love Story. And then at the far end is Mike. Let's hear it for Kara. Runs Grassroots Lab, which is a premier consulting group in California. He was political director of the California Republican Party. He is co-founder of the Lincoln Project and has a new book out called The Latino Century. So, pretty good panel. So Adam, we'll start with you.
Terrific.
We've got climate change, polarization, a border. What the hell's going on?
Well, as some of you may know, who've been coming to these sessions, I started off on the far right of the repatriation session. Then I was moved to the far left for the happiness session, and now they've put me in the squishy center, where I doubtless belong most. Let me try and answer your question, David, with 2 big picture takes and then a small picture take, and the small picture take may be more important than the big picture takes. The biggest of the big picture takes on the crisis we're living through is that liberal democracies, open societies, if you like, call them what you will, depend on free and fair elections, on the rule of law, certainly, but even more, they depend on the foundation of liberal institutions, of things like schools and parks, universities, libraries, glee clubs. My favorite example of a powerful liberal institution that doesn't look powerful is the coffee house. The story of the emancipation of humankind from oppression is tied to the existence of coffee houses throughout Europe and America in the 18th centuries as gathering places where people could come and have free conversations outside of the control of the state. They didn't even have to be political conversations. They could simply be the act of conversation itself was emancipating. And it's no accident that in Iran today, the religious police go about the business of shutting down coffee houses exactly because they understand the potential of liberal institutions to create freer societies. It's apparent, I think, that liberal institutions are weakened, are under assault, are not as resilient as we want them to be. And that, I think, is the first big picture part of the problem. The internet, which everyone expected or dreamt of being the world's biggest coffee house, has turned out to be something more like the worst boys' bathroom in the most bullying high school in the world. That's the first big picture problem as I see it. The second one is obviously more narrowly political, and that is the wave of far right-wing, call it what you will, populism, nativism, that swept through the entire North American and European worlds. We just had the Euro elections in my second adopted country of France, and we have a far-right party threatening to come to power there. And what's striking about that wave that has struck so many shores, including our own, is how uniform it is in its composition. And it isn't, as best we can understand it, a struggle of the dispossessed against the privileged so much as it is a persistent struggle in France, in Britain during Brexit, and in America, and even in my native land of Canada, where politics never seemed to happen. It's beginning to happen now. And that is of rural against urban, the old against the young, and above all, those with diplomas against those without. And it's remarkably consistent, those patterns, in all of those otherwise very different countries. Those, I think, are the two big picture crises that we face: the crisis of liberal institutions, learning how to confront and deal with and understand that right-wing nativist impulse. But finally, there is the little picture, the little window that I want to come to at the risk of being somewhat pugnacious. Anne Applebaum, the great historian of the Gulag Archipelago, hardly a woke activist, the farthest thing from it, said on the night of the Euro elections, there is not a single far-right leader in all of Europe who has ever rejected the results of an election. Not a single one, not Le Pen in France, not in Germany, nowhere has that happened. No country has the idea that a free and fair election should be rejected and that the peaceful transfer of power should be occluded. That has only happened in one country, and that is our own. And we are in a moment of absolute urgency as a consequence to recognize the scale of that threat to democracy itself. And if we don't confront that little picture threat with every breath in our bodies, we will not be in any position to begin to remedy the larger picture.
Okay. Kara, let's go to you next. What the hell's going on?
I don't quite know what to say, except the boys' bathroom is a good analogy. I hadn't thought of it, and I appreciate it. I love how you looked at me when you're like, the internet, like I was in charge of it.
No, I defer to your expertise upon it.
Well, I've been doing my level best to warn you.
Indeed.
You know, I'm not a historian. I've been a technology reporter, and I think it's fair to say the thing that's changed in the last many years, 2 decades pretty much, since I started covering it in the 1990s, has been the advent of the internet, which we all thought would bring people together in a form of community. But the way it's been designed, Brian was just on, he's a designer. The way things are designed are the way things tend to go. And I think the internet was thought of as something that could bring people together, and there are these grand ideas of bringing everybody together, and that how it would show us that, someone here has the same problems as Russia, has the same problems as somewhere else. And what it's done, because of the profit motives behind it, is to separate us rather significantly, because it's in shareholders' interest to keep us engaged. And the thing that keeps us engaged is enragement. So enragement equals engagement, which I talked about earlier. And it's become such a for-profit motive that it's almost impossible for it not to go that way. So I don't particularly blame the tech companies, but these are multi-trillion-dollar, the most valuable companies in the history of the earth, owned by the people that are the richest people on the planet ever. And this is counting Cleopatra, who was pretty rich, from what I understand. And so you have a situation where the very small elite group of people have created themselves as kings and potentates, and but are making decisions that the rest of society has to pay for. And so, when the internet started, I've used this example quite a lot on my book tour. I was always trying to warn people, although I love technology. There was a Twilight Zone episode called To Serve Man. And these aliens came down, they solved every problem that people had in society. They had the big head that we like to put on aliens. Why do we do that, I wonder? Interesting. So I think they'd have small heads, or no heads at all. So they came down, they solved the problem, and they left behind a book, and we were trying to translate it. Humanity was, and we could only translate the cover, which was To Serve Man, and everyone was like, oh, yay, they're here to help us. And of course, I'm not going to ruin the plot, but if you haven't seen it by now, too bad. It's like 100. It's 100 years old at this point. So I'm sorry you didn't catch up to Bridgerton. I won't tell you the end of that one. But Penelope Featherington for the win. She's so great. But it's a cookbook, right? It's a cookbook, and it's something I've been trying to say. It's a cookbook, and you all are the ingredients of what it is. And so until we start to figure out a way to make that community better, because it's the way everything's going in the future, and Sam and Brian were just talking about it, with these technologies that are ever more powerful, unless we figure out a way for all of us to be part of it and not the ingredients, I think it's a really worrisome situation. And it's no mistake that the single greatest user of the internet in the political age is Donald Trump. He's an expert. You may not like him, but he's quite good at internet.
At enragement.
And enragement. And he's perfectly tailored the way Franklin Roosevelt with radio or John F. Kennedy with television to use this. And at some point, someone was going to come along who was a bad actor to start to use and abuse these ever-powerful technologies. And that's where we are now. But it does not have to be that way, and I can talk about that more later. Because on some level, there's a lot of catastrophizing of everything. And, people are sort of like, I don't know why this idea that they're going to inevitably win I think is not true. Because they haven't over the history of time. The Salem witch trials, everything else, they just haven't. And for us to sit around and go, oh no, it's the end times, to me is sort of, anyone I'm a gay person, anyone who's a person of color, who's a woman, knows they're always after us. So everybody else, and I'm talking largely men, get on fucking board. We know they're after us. So that was what I would say.
Okay. Feeling bellicose already. Sherrilyn.
Yeah, Kara, that was a great setup. Thank you.
Take it home.
Yeah.
Take it home.
So this is American Vortex, and I only feel equipped to speak about a country that I have studied and feel quite familiar with. I think in our country we are so disengaged from the truth of our history, from the truth of what it took to build this room, to have all of us be in this room and be able to be in this room, to have some people in this room be married to who they're married to have people be able to purchase homes in the places where some of you have been able to purchase homes, or go to schools where some of you have been able to go to schools. We treat that like it's air. We treat it like it was always this way, even though many of you in this room are old enough to remember when it was not so. Everyone didn't have access to the coffee house either. And so when we come upon moments of innovation or moments of crisis, and we forget that history, we forget that what we have managed to stitch together has been powerfully fought for in the courts, in the streets, everywhere, then we fall into a situation in which we are creating things with a blank slate. Internet is the perfect example. I had many conversations with Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg in 2019 and 2020, and I would hear this conversation about creating this public square where everyone could speak. And what I would say to Sheryl and Mark is, you have not evidenced that you have any understanding of how the public square and access to the public square was negotiated in this country. The public square is not just a place you walk up into. We had to have a Civil Rights Act of 1964 to ensure that I could go to the bathroom in the public square, that I could go to the coffee shop in the public square or in the airport. So if you don't know that history, then you treat these things that arise on the platform as utter surprises. Who could have imagined that there would be campaigns that would target racial or religious groups. Who could have imagined Gamergate? Who could have imagined all of this stuff when our history is all there ready to tell you what, unless we decide to be proactive, will happen? And hearing the conversation about AI just before this panel is the same thing. So when we enter this bold new world, who are the people sitting at the table and what knowledge do they have about the truth of this country, about what lives in our DNA, about what have been the hardest issues that we have grappled with and been unable to overcome, about our finest moments, which have involved us being able to confront those very difficult issues like racism and white supremacy, and contain them, and figure out how to protect people, and figure out how to ensure the dignity of all people. If you're not operating with that as the framework of something vital to know about this country, then the idea that you are so genius and such an innovator that the government should not regulate what you do because you're so smart is gross mismanagement of public policy and utterly irresponsible. The faster the car, you know, Sam talked about the faster the car and how you have to, you know, peer into or maybe Brian said it, and you have to look more closely ahead. No, actually what you had to do was that a very unpopular law requiring seatbelts had to be passed in this country. And if many of you will remember during that period, there were car manufacturers who said this is interfering with the design and the innovation of our vehicles.
And the liberty of...
And the liberty of people getting in them. My father was one of them. So I'm the youngest of 10 children. When I was very young, one of my earliest memories is getting into our Buick and taking my seat, which was on the floor behind the driver. Later on, when some of my older siblings moved away, and my father was able to get a Cadillac, his dream, then we sat, there were 6 of us, and there were 3 in the back and 3 in the front. Now we have a seatbelt law. And you can't stuff as many people into the car as you want to stuff into the car. And my father said, this is discrimination, it's outrageous. I don't want to wear this seatbelt. And it was only after getting pulled over and getting tickets that he had to wear the seatbelt, right? Now, was that some gross intrusion on his civil liberties or on his rights? No, an assessment was made by government about highway deaths, about what could prevent highway deaths, and those innovative manufacturers who made these beautiful cars were compelled to put in something that would protect the American public. Right. That's what has to happen with the internet. And the last thing I'll just say is, that what truly ails us, David, is our willingness to withdraw from public life. Healthy democracies have a strong public life. They have public universities. They have strong public schools. They have a public square where people can engage. And because the Supreme Court in 1954, in Brown versus Board of Education and in the cases that flow from it, made clear now that everything public would have to be shared on an equal basis with black people, far too many white people in this country demonized that which is public. If I say public schools to you, you have an image in your head of who's in those schools. If I say public transportation, when we have these wars about should we pay for highways or public transportation, there is a racial patina over that conversation. We have withdrawn from working towards the public good because far too many people believe that when we talk about the public good, we're talking about giving free things to black people. So, one of the tasks before us is figuring out how to confront that reality and get our country re-engaged in caring not just about our own children, but caring about other people's children as well.
Now, Mike, you've been through a couple revolutions, I would say. One, the evolution of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Nice job with that. But also your book, The Latino Century, the immigration of various Latino groups to this country and what they've accomplished in this country is also quite a revolutionary thing. How do you see the big picture?
I think, first of all, this crisis in our institutions has become a defining feature of the digital age, right? The digital age for people of my age was always something that was coming. We're eyeballs deep in this thing, and what we're realizing is A lot of the social constructs that we created to make liberal democracy work, and frankly society in general work, aren't working. And it's pretty broad-based, and its collapse is part of the fear and anxiety and concern that we have because we're barreling down a road into a future that none of us, frankly, as a species, have ever really endured before. We can't seem to find common ground or find the trust and confidence in institutions to make things work. One of the things that I find particularly interesting is that it's most pronounced with voters that are 65 years of age and over. Nobody in this room, of course. But that cohort has one of the most negative views of America and where we're at and its future, despite having a lifetime of relative prosperity and peace and, to a certain extent, global hegemony in the United States. But one of the biggest disruptions that's happening in our society, at least in our American society, and I think it's also true of Western Europe, is this dramatic transformation of our complexion. We will be in 8 years, 8 short years, America will be a non-white majority country for the first time in our history. That's going to change so much about how we perceive the world, how we perceive ourselves, and how we engage with these institutions. And one of the most promising demographics, just wrote a book about it, is that this Latinization of America, this transformation ethnically and racially that is happening, is overwhelmingly with Latinos and the Latino population. Exponential growth rates are starting to happen right now. We're seeing at the voting booth. This is the one group of Americans that have, by a wide measure, the greatest trust and confidence in our institutions broadly. And our negative perceptions of our institutions have gotten so bad in this country that we've actually partisanized them. And we no longer believe that maybe they're in need of reform or they need to be fixed or need to be invested in. If we don't agree with them, we think that they need to be destroyed or that they are trying to destroy us. So the right will say the academy, the media, the government, is out to get them. And the left will say things like the church, the military, sometimes corporations are out to get them. And it's better to kind of just get rid of them almost in its entirely or neuter them if we're going to go forward with our zero-sum vision of the world. But, and this is what I want you all to think about, what we are becoming as a country, demographically, our DNA that is emerging is actually where the solutions to this cultural crisis is. This belief in who we are, this hope in the American experiment. That's what makes America move forward. That's what always has moved us forward. And that mythology is being brought forward more pronounced by a younger, poorer, blacker and browner generation, despite having less reasons to believe in it. And it's why ultimately I'm optimistic, despite all the calamity, all the fragility, all the worry about the underpinnings of democracy spinning off of its axles. Our solutions literally are inside of us. And every day in America we wake up and we're still here, demographically, I think we are closer to becoming not just alive and existing, but actually a better model for what our original promise was intended to be.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to pivot us to more hopeful progress, and I'll ask for shorter questions so we can get through at least maybe 2 more rounds in the 10 minutes we have remaining. Now, a couple years ago, I read a book called The Politics of Disharmony by a guy named Samuel Huntington. And he wrote the book in 1981, and he said, I noticed this weird pattern in American history. Every 60 years, we tend to go through what he called a moral convulsion. And that's people get disgusted with established power, a new passionate generation comes on the scene, a new form of communications technology, groups that have been excluded demand inclusion. He said this happened in the 1770s, happened in the 1830s with the Age of Jackson, the 1890s and the Industrial Revolution, the 1960s. And writing in 1981, he wrote, I don't know if this pattern holds, but if it does, sometime around 2020, America will go through another moral convulsion. So I thought, pretty good. But the hopefulness is we come out of them. We have a period where we have to reform, and we do reform. And Sherrilyn, I'll start with you, and again, if we could keep it brief, keep it shorter. But there was an implied story of progress in your last answer. And so,
Yeah,
point
absolutely.
us forward.
Absolutely. I mean, so I do not count this country as a democracy until at least 1954, because half of the country was under legal apartheid, and so that's not a democracy. Some would say 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, but certainly 1954. And what I believe is that we are a very young democracy, at least a multiracial democracy that actually is trying to do it the right way. And so I tend to be a little bit more patient with this country because I only see us as being quite young and quite, frankly, unused to what probably most of us have come to accept as what American life is like, but which is in fact actually very new. What is exciting for me about this moment, I am as fearful as the next person about calamity, about democratic unraveling, because even though I believe ultimately the end will work itself out, many people can be hurt in the interim. And we should not make a small thing of that simply by knowing that we're going somewhere that may be positive. But what is great about each iteration of, if it's this every 60-year convulsion, is that we have the opportunity to create a better country. I've been, as you know, and talked about the other day, focused on the 14th Amendment and the post-Civil War period. We actually have the power to remake our country and to make our democracy healthier. We have the power to decide what our national identity is going to be. In the post-Civil War period, we moved this idea of equality and justice into the center of the national identity, which prior to that had just been about liberty and freedom. And we have that power to do that. My concern is that if people are so discouraged and so unbelieving in our future, that they won't pick up the weights that we need to pick up in our hands to lift above our heads and work. This is a period where we are called to intensely work. It would be wonderful if we were all alive during the harvest and the wonderful times when we could see our country moving forward. But what if this is the planting time? What if this is the time when we are supposed to embed what will create this new America that will be will be better than the one in the past? That's how I'm conceiving of this moment, and I'm inviting others to see it that way as well.
Okay, I'm sort of inspired by that planting, by that planting moment metaphor. That's a beautiful encapsulation. But I'm going to ask the same question, maybe in a more personal way for the remaining three, and that's, what is history demanding of you personally? Like, you're in this moment, what's the mission that, given your resources, given whatever you have, what's your personal mission in this moment to make a difference?
To protect and defend liberal institutions wherever we can encounter them and wherever they are endangered. I think Sherrilyn's point is absolutely right. The United States was incredibly weak on democratic institutions for the majority of its history, and yet in other ways stronger in liberal institutions. I wrote a long essay about Bayard Rustin not long ago. Rustin depended on the existing culture of the African-American Friends for everything else that happened. The only thing I'd add is that those 60-year convulsions don't always happen on the right side. The Confederacy was a 60-year convulsion right on schedule from the Constitution. And I'd say only then that there are moments for planning, but there are also moments for honest confrontation.
Yes.
I wrote a long essay as well about Lincoln and Douglas, and Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. And we tend to fetishize or sentimentalize Lincoln's appetite for conciliation. But even more important was his readiness for confrontation. He recognized that there were certain moments in the life of a country where you could no longer simply tolerate, conciliate, and understand, where you had to be resolute in defense of democratic values, however limited they might have been. I think and believe that we are maybe in one of those moments, and that I see it as my job to continually try to aerate, amplify, enlighten the fight for those institutions.
Okay, Karen?
Yeah,
Absolutely on point.
I have this is so thoughtful for a thing called Vortex, which also means maelstrom, and it was started with the Exorcist music. Did you all hear that? I think I'm a lot simpler person. I think my role, the traditional thing of journalists is afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That's not really my job, although I like to afflict the comfortable quite a bit as a personal thing. But I think when I think about it, the thing I say a lot to a lot of people is, oh, no, you don't. Like, I think I do that a lot with tech moguls and stuff like that, or no. Like, what you're saying is pure bullshit, or, oh, no, you don't, is what I think I do for a living. Like, oh, no, no, that's not what's going to happen. That's not true. That's not this. And I think what the job of journalists today, and it's a very different job, is not just to repeat what people say, it's not just to report on people who say, but also to try using reporting and reported analysis, and not punditry, because that's a whole different thing, to really to do really great reporting, do an assessment, and then come to a friggin' conclusion. And I think what journalists tend to try to do is say, well, I can't decide.
Balance on two,
And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to tell you, actually, what Elon's doing right now is bullshit. It's bullshit, and I'm sorry, it's toxic and ugly and gross. You can clap or not, you can be on his side or not, but that's what I think. And so I think what you have to do is, once you get an assessment, or whoever it happens to be, whether it's AI, is to push back, not necessarily all the time, but also to support at the time. I like this, I don't like this, I don't do this. But it has to be from a place of really good reporting. And the other thing we can't be scared to do, and I think journalists really are on their back foot a lot more than they need to be. No one's ever liked a journalist since the beginning of our country, by the way, FYI. You know.
After Watergate,
yes, they did for a short, brief moment, and they made a movie, and it was lovely, but mostly they don't like journalists. Is to stop, like, media is at all-time lows. Well, all right, fine. Like, I don't know what to say. So is the priesthood, so are congressmen, so are everything. I think what we have to do, and I think the successful journalists of the future is they do amazing reporting and then tell it as truthfully as they can to people in an information. We used to have an information desert. We now have an information flood, and it is just as bad, if not worse. And so when you have people in an information flood zone, they get so much information from everyone, and before they didn't listen to it at all. Your job is to say, here's what I know. You either take it or leave it and move on. I think that's really, we have to have a lot more courage as journalists, not to worry so much about what people think of us. I mean, obviously I don't. But I think and back it up with really good, fair, and accurate reporting. And then if you don't want to listen to it, you have my mother who loves Fox News. That's fine.
Okay, Mike, bring us home.
One of the reasons why I love Kara Swisher so much is because she's so fierce and approaches her craft so fearlessly. I'll answer the question by saying, you know, when 8 of us got together and started the Lincoln Project, thank you. I said that not for the applause line, but because I'm a little embarrassed that it took 8 political consultants to be the moral backbone of the Republican Party.
We'll take it.
You'll take what you can get, right? But moreover, it wasn't that we were doing anything particularly courageous. It's that everybody was displaying such cowardice. And that is what I think is still so troubles me so deeply about what I learned about certainly the Republican Party, relationships I had for 30, 40 years, but also just what our capacity is as human beings to let not just each other down, but ourselves down. And these are those moments. These are those moments right now where we are all being tested to sacrifice and to show courage and to stand and be counted, because history will be keeping score.
History has his eyes on you.
Sherrilyn, Adam, Kara, Mike, thank you so much.
Thank you.